Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
The National Empowerment Fund has the exclusive status of facilitator of the BEE Codes of Good Practice. Their core mandate is to support black economic participation in the mainstream economy and also to ensure that South African corporates transform. But it's been a rough ride. As we heard earlier on, there's been resistance by big business and there's also been a militancy on the part of black executives. Today we're unpacking the difficulties of transformation with Philisiwe Buthelezi. She's also the first black woman corporate dealer in South Africa. She's been Chief Director in the Department of Trade and Industry, and she's worked for the supervisory arm of the Reserve Bank. Philisiwe Buthelezi, CEO of the NEF, is our Captain of Industry today. Philisiwe, thanks for staying with us. We've been talking about the difficulties and the need to continue to advance this agenda for black economic empowerment and transformation. How do you respond when people say BEE may change the face of business, but it's not actually creating entrepreneurs? It's not creating ingenuity. It's just saying to black people, find a bit of money, get your equity, change the structure of a company, and you're sorted. It's not making people come up with really innovative ideas for dynamic business change.
I would say, Lerato, they are partly right, but you must also look at some of the positive developments that are taking place from other institutions, especially the institutions that are owned by the government of South Africa. We should look at the National Empowerment Fund, the IDC, those types of entities, and look at how they have implemented their BEE policies in the past. So if I can talk about what the NEF has achieved, I would say that we started about 6 years ago. At the time when I joined the fund, they had only disbursed about 21 million rands to about 4 entities. That was 6 years ago. There was no proper infrastructure. There were no processes. So when we came on board together with the board of directors that was appointed at that time, we had to start from scratch. But I'm actually very, excited to report that we have now advanced financing opportunities and financing products to about 270 companies in South Africa. And the total value of those enterprises or financing products that we have advanced would equate to something like 2.6 billion rands within a short period of time. So when going back to what you're saying about BEE, the differentiator there is that the NEF is actually creating sustainable enterprises in this country that can add value to the economy. So that's what we're doing. So basically there has been this huge shift from just focusing on your acquisition type financing, where you just be facilitating the entry of black people into established businesses. I'm not saying that that should stop. But I'm saying you need to be looking at other ways and options of advancing the cause of
and hence something like the Enterprise Development Fund.
The Enterprise Development Fund. Yeah. So the Enterprise Development Fund is a new initiative, but you should be aware that we have already developed a suite of other financing products that we have offered to black enterprises. So as a response to the need, so what we did, we conducted a comprehensive research on the implementation of broad-based BEE since 2001. And the reason why we're continuously conducting the research is because we're worried. We don't want to find ourselves 10 years from now, in the same situation that we were at, 10 years ago. So we have to continuously look at the gaps and see if entities like the NEF can't fill those gaps. Right. So the Enterprise Development Fund is one of those tools that has been designed to actually find a way of partnering with the private sector to develop black-owned enterprises in this country.
Do you ever get tired of talking about deracializing the economy? We've moved full circle, I think, as South Africa, from apartheid to national reconciliation to economic justice to just being people with good moral character. Do you ever get tired of having to see things in black and white?
It's tiring. It's very tiring. But you must remember, Lerato, that we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the people of this country and for our future generations. I want to retire gracefully. I don't want to be asked by the youth, so Philisiwe, I mean, you were there. You were there, so what was your role? Yeah. You know, it's tiring, but, you know, we have to persist.
Madame, vous parlez français?
Mais bien sûr.
Tu l'apprends d'où ça?
Mais j'ai appris à Paris quand j'étais très jeune. J'ai reçu une bourse du gouvernement français et j'ai étudié
pour faire des études en Sorbonne.
À la Sorbonne, oui.
The reason I'm doing this is many people would never think that a South African woman can speak French. We've been so isolated as a country, and we don't have any kind of historical links with France. So what took you there?
Yeah, Lerato, it's a long story. I think I was young, I was energetic at that time. I just wanted to go and discover the world, as they say.
And France, of all places?
Yes, you know, there was just something, some attraction. Yes, and I think it was just based on the books that I used to read about that country. And what I did, I approached the French government. At that time, I went to their offices in Pretoria. Remember, it was during the apartheid era. They were very, very excited. They encouraged me to study French.
Yes.
You know, it was not part of my curriculum.
Exactly.
But they found a way to actually include it as part of my curriculum. And I studied French for a year, and the following year I was in Paris.
At the Sorbonne.
Mais oui.
So with that little bit of French background, I mean, how does that influence how you see the world? I also have a little bit of a French history, and I quite like the fashion, and I like that, you know, that flair. You know, and I think it does show in my personality a little bit. I got a bit of a, you know, I'm cheeky and nice type thing. How does that inform your worldview?
I think what it did for me, it just opened the world for me, because you must remember that Paris is a very cosmopolitan city. The first time I actually got a real connection with Africa and the rest of the world was when I was living in Paris. So you'd actually understand your own politics in your country from another perspective and from another angle. And also it was just their teaching methods, which were totally different from, you know, what I was used to when I was here in South Africa. You'd actually find professors in economics, you know, who were so clued up on South African issues and African issues in general. So that's what really inspired me.
I'm curious, you're saying, you know, in France, you found this cosmopolitan melting pot of cultures, and that helped you sort of position yourself as a South African in the broader context of the world. Those who are very critical of the French say the French are very good at assimilation. They're very good at turning people into Frenchmen and women, but not embracing your culture in the way in which you find in other countries, where you come in, you coexist, but you're very much a Zulu girl from South Africa. In France, you must become French. Is that a fair comment?
I don't really, I don't think so. But I would still admit that I love fashion, and and I love France. I still go back. Good food,
good wine.
Good food, good wine, and I still go maybe twice a year. In fact, I'm missing the sales now because the sales are on.
Because you're busy sitting here having this conversation with me. France also very much in the news at the moment, with the former finance minister being appointed the managing director of the IMF, and also in the news for all the notoriety of Dominique Strauss-Kahn. When you look at that situation, how do you read it?
I have to say that what has happened with, I still say Minister Strauss-Kahn because I know him as a minister. He was actually the Minister of Finance in France with the socialist government. I remember one time our Minister of Trade and Industry the then Minister of Trade and Industry, who was Alec Ewin at the time, once took me to a meeting with him whilst he was visiting Paris. And I have absolute respect for him as a leader and as a person. But now going back to the appointment of Madame Lagarde, I think we have to celebrate it as women from all over the world, because I'm sure you'll remember what I was saying earlier on, that since 1945, that was at the time when these Bretton Woods institutions were established, I don't think we have seen any woman who was put in such a powerful position of authority. But knowing Madame Lagarde, I'm very convinced that when she goes in there, I know that obviously the most pressing demand for her now would be to try and deal with issues
around global recovery,
around Greece and all of those pressing issues. But going forward, I have no doubt in my mind that one of the things that she's going to be fighting for would be to try and position women, you know, in some of those institutions.
I'm glad you've taken us there, because I often feel, and I could be wrong, that too much pressure is put on women in leadership positions, that by virtue of your being CEO of the NEF, you have to advance a gender agenda. You know, you've got a much bigger obligation, which is, you know, democratizing South Africa, deracializing the economy, and then you must consider all the women who are to follow. Do you often find it's too much of a burden?
No.
Or it's just easy, it's just a natural thing that happens?
With some of the women, it's a natural thing, but other women will argue that during Thatcher's era in the UK, that there were very few women who were actually, you know, put in positions of authority. So it depends on your character. But I always say, Lerato, that when you are given this authority as a woman, you must just say, what was this one big thing that I actually did for other women in this country? You know, when we were drafting the codes of good practice on broad-based black economic empowerment, and we're then required to go and present the codes to our cabinet, we put the figure for women ownership in the codes is at 40%. And that has now become legislation in this country. When we put in that number, we're so scared. We thought, oh, I'm sure the ministers will think we're crazy. But we said we'll put it anyway. And then if they take it down, maybe they will take it down to 30%. And we're very surprised because we got overwhelming support from our cabinet. So I'm saying, and that has been legislated now. But as to how that policy now has, that's another question. But at least I was working with other women to ensure that the interests of women in this country are indeed protected. Not just protected, you know, by talking, but by making sure that these things are captured as, you know, the policies of this country.
Who's been your greatest mentor in your career?
It's actually my brother, my big brother, Sifiso.
Yes?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, we have a long, in fact, it was him and my dad. From a professional perspective, I would say it was my brother, but just by, you know, when we were growing up and knowing what was, you know, the right thing to do, I would say it was both my father and my mom. But talking about, let me talk about my dad first. You know, we grew up with literally nothing. My parents were both teachers, and I'm sure you'll understand better the conditions that our teachers, you know, lived in at that time. But he used to say, and even at that time, as young as I was, I still loved fashion. So he used to say, the only thing that will take you out of this vicious cycle of poverty is education. That's the only thing I can give you. And he And that was to all of us, because I come from a family of 8, 5 brothers and 3 sisters. And that was the only thing he promised us. That was both my dad and my mum. And that's what we got. So once we had all of that education, now obviously you need to understand, you know, corporate politics and politics in general. Then I would say my brother has been my mentor up until now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Philisiwe, it's been great having you, resplendent in pink, a woman but fighting hard for the rights of other women and also for posterity. She's the CEO of the National Empowerment Fund, on a poignant note paying tribute to her parents.